Okay, this is John Willis. Here we are, another Docker podcast with a Docker captain. Stefan Scherer, did I pronounce that right, Stefan?
Yes, that's correct, John.
Brilliant. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Stefan, and I'm a software engineer here in Germany in a small software company. And I'm really passionate about Docker and started to learn about Docker about 2 years ago. And we use it at work on a daily basis. And I'm also very interested in the Docker on Windows stuff thing. But we will talk later about that, I think.
So,
Yeah.
one of the things I always like to do is get a little bit of, I do a podcast with my friend Damon Edwards. I'll have to do a shameless plug, the DevOps Cafe podcast. But this is Damon's idea. We always ask a guest to kind of give us a little, like, how did you become you story?
Yes, I started to learn Docker, I think, about more than 2 years ago in a small team. And we had the crazy idea to learn it on the Raspberry Pi. That was my first contact, I think, to Docker. Heard about Docker before a little bit and didn't understand the commands. What's so different to VMs, I think. But starting with the Raspberry Pi, I really got to the details, what's containers, what is needed to run it on the Raspberry Pi. And after some weeks, I think we in our team have built a complete new kernel for the Pi and the root file system and what you need in the underground below the Docker engine so it can run smoothly on a Raspberry Pi. That was the first point to get into contact to the Docker technology. And at that point, it was beginning of 2015, I think. We started to write blog posts about it, how to build a Docker swarm with a couple of Raspberry Pis and some blog posts like that. And some month later, I think I got contacted by Docker because I wrote more and more blog posts and showed and others how to build stuff with Docker on the small device. And they asked me at some point if I want to become a Docker captain. That's a title from Docker for people like me and others writing about Docker, how to use it, share the knowledge about it in meetups and smaller talks. And that was a deeper contact with Docker itself, I think. And at some later point, I also got attracted by the effort by Microsoft as they announced they want to build Docker for the Windows platform, running Windows containers. And here in my company, we are also rewriting a new software written in microservices. And we are focused on the Linux containers at that time, of course. But we also have heard from our management, hey, the most of our customers are Windows customers. And so I put one and one together and said, hey, look, Microsoft is planning to write Docker for Windows. So we can, at some point in the future, perhaps run our microservices in Windows containers. And that was also 1.5 years ago, I think. And at the moment, we are really running it in a test environment here, but showed it our first customers. And they were really astonished by, wow, that's running on Windows as well.
That's pretty cool. I mean, I definitely want you to walk us through the kind of Windows experience, but I guess, one of the things when people talk about microservices is one of the core tenets is that you can allow teams or different functional development structures, whether they're teams or their groups, or to kind of create their kind of unbounded service, if you will, in a microservice architecture with limited restrictions on the framework, right? So in the Linux world, we talk about how one team could create a Node.js, another team can create a Python, another team could create a Java, and one of the beauties of is you don't have you don't have to force an opinionated, we must all use Java and this is the framework. I guess I should have thought of this, but I guess that works even better and equally when you can have that freedom across kind of Linux and Windows. Was that part of a motivation?
Yes. In the past, we also had a lot of things in Java, and also bundled into a bigger application server, and we are splitting that out into smaller services and have now the freedom, of course, to choose another language, or if it fits a third-party tool that's written in a complete different language, it doesn't matter. It's a Windows, it's a Docker image that you can run like the others, and that's it.
So walk me through. I can play the podcast host, so I can ask questions from our listeners. But some of it, I know, fair enough to be dangerous. But walk us through what really is kind of Docker on Windows.
Yeah, I've started with the first available ISO file, so you can create an own virtual machine of it with a technical preview 3, I think, and started to automate the VM at the first point, and then I had Docker on it and played around with it, and it really involved to production-ready basis at the moment, that you can really spin up multiple container applications that talk together. Perhaps not all the features are available at the moment as you are used on the Linux side, but it's coming soon, I think. And
but you have you have like Nano Server, or is it there's a stripped down version of Windows Server as your ISO?
Yes. Okay, let's talk about that at the first point.
Yeah.
Microsoft has created two base OS images, I will call them. The more normal version is the Windows Server Core. That is more like the normal Server Core edition without the UI, but you can install most of the software you're used to. You can use common MSI packages and install it through the command line or through the Docker file with it. The Nano server is much more stripped down to have a smaller footprint, a smaller size of the base image, but also it comes with less features. You can't install MSI packages. And at the first point, it was, whoa, that's a hard stuff to use Nano server. But after some weeks looking into the two Docker images, I found out the only difficulty for using Nano server with Docker is you only need the vendor that puts, for example, Node.js into a Nano server, or Ruby, or Java, or all your framework like .NET or something like that. But you're building your application upon these languages, and then all there's a difference between Nano and Server Core vanishes away as you just change your Docker file from line. You just choose the other, for example, Ruby image that is based on the Nano server, and that's it. And you put your Ruby application into it, or Node.js.
So would it be a fair statement to say that if you wanted to use some of the packaged Microsoft applications like SQL Server or something, you would use the Windows Core, and if you were building your own application, your own Java or Ruby or Node.js or whatever, you would, again, there are reasons for doing vice versa, but in general, you would use Nano server for kind of home-built app. Is that a fair?
Yes, it depends on.
Hey, John, you're wrong. You're an idiot. That's okay too.
It depends on what, for example, Microsoft provides. I don't know exactly if SQL Server is also available in the Nano server image, but if there's one on the Docker Hub from Microsoft, I would always prefer the smaller one, the Nano server image. And so it's also a recommendation by me to use the Nano server variant. If there are two same,
yes, okay,
just try the Nano, and you're image will be smaller afterwards.
Got it. So yeah, always kind of go. It's like it's just same thing with Docker, right? In general, in Linux, right? You're always trying to go to kind of the least viable, or at least the minimal viable operating environment, if possible, right? I mean,
yes.
But I guess the meta point here is if it's some package that requires MSI and you don't have the bandwidth to decouple that installation process, or Microsoft hasn't already done it for you, then you're most likely going to use the Windows core, server core.
Yes, in that case, you can use a server core and go with it as well. Yeah, sure.
And so, but in general, it's from what I understand, it's the same Docker API. So for the most part, your kind of Docker run and your Docker build, and as you have already pointed out, your Docker file. Most of those things are supported. Obviously, there would be some intricacies in Linux versus Windows, but it's basically a daemon client that, at least from a user experience, looks very similar. That's a true statement.
Yeah, that's really fascinating to see it at the first time. If you are used to run Linux containers and you're in the first moment you run for example, an interactive Windows container, and their command shell or a PowerShell opens for example, from your MacBook, because you're talking with the Mac Docker client with a Windows Docker engine. And you can easily switch your environments, running a Linux container with a Linux Docker engine and running a Windows container with a Windows Docker engine. But the API is completely the same. You can use a Docker client. You can use Docker Compose YAML files to draft multi-container applications and link them together. And for example, DNS works. So your service Mongo is resolved by the hostname Mongo, also in Windows containers, and that works pretty much the same.
Brilliant. No, this is fun. So one last question on the more like Docker Windows use cases. So you say that you learned about Docker, and then you sort of heard about the Windows, and you knew that you had a client base that was that had a lot of .NET applications. Where do you think the areas? And it's probably a generic question, but like as much as you can be specific. What do you think are going to be where the areas that will catch on quicker for kind of traditional Windows environments with Docker for Windows? Do you have any feel for what you think your clients or what you're already seeing?
Yeah, we've told them, our customers, to at the moment they are probably on Windows Server 2012 or 2, and we have showed them, look, the next version of your server will come with Docker functionality built in. We only have to activate a feature, install the Docker service on it, and your environment is able to run Windows containers. It's just a matter of updating your servers. And at that point, you can use containers on the Windows world.
Yeah, 2016, right? But do you think, I mean, one of the things that really kicked off Docker in the Linux world initially was, the kind of, it became just so obvious to build kind of your continuous delivery pipelines with Docker. I'm wondering if that's something, to me, it would be obvious that would be an area I would think. I mean, I know we're seeing that kind of success, particularly even with the Windows-based IDEs and all. That seemed like that would be a fast-growing area where people get some immediate value.
Yeah, I think for the Windows world, it's important to have some IDE support. I've heard other keynotes where Donovan Brown from Microsoft said, "Oh, I'm behind my IDE and I just want to F5 debugging and I'm happy with it, and activate with right-click my Docker support." Sure, that is one of the major steps to make it easy to use it from the usual IDEs they are used on developing Windows software. And the integrations are great at the moment and will improve in the next month, I think, for Visual Studio Code, and all the major editors and IDEs there.
Yeah.
I think they will also support Windows Docker engines in the background as well. And you can fluently work and create Linux containers or Windows containers. And yeah, it's becoming very easy, I think.
Yeah, and you've got we'll circle back to your blog, because I looked at your blog. You got some really Stefan's got some great stuff. Like, we only have a small window here in this podcast. We could spend hours going over some really cool stuff. So we'll circle back to your blog at the end. But the other area I just wanted to touch on, like, why are you crazy guys trying to put Docker on Raspberry Pis? Are you guys crazy? What's the gig there? What do you think? Where does that take us?
I think, and we had really the feeling, as Docker is a lightweight isolation technique, it must be possible to run it on some small device, because it doesn't take too much memory and resources from that small device, and you still have lots of space left to run your application in a container. And as we have played with it and used it in a swarm, it enables you to also use the same Docker API and workflow, building images through your CI/CD pipeline, pushing it to your remote Docker-enabled ARM devices, IoT devices, and can update your service there with also all the same tools you know from your cloud-based services.
Yeah, no, I've talked to people in kind of the industrial and in IoT. It's the same thing, where you find that people who are just pure electrical engineers or just working on industrial control systems, like, who've never had any sysadmin background, and they literally find out about Docker and, like, shortcut all the years of pain and suffering us sysadmins had to endure, and they can actually do, like, very exotic delivery models, and so that's kind of cool. I guess so. And this is great. This is great, Stefan. I guess to end up is, how do people find out more about you? And Docker Captains, you're the third Docker Captain now we've done a podcast with. We've talked about, like, how awesome it is to be a Docker Captain, although I'm not one. And I think at very least you get nice jackets or something like that. But yeah, you guys and girls, men and women, are just absolutely amazing. The amount of passion and effort that you put into Docker and for your own purposes. We try to get you all together. I've talked to Namil Mehta, and he talks about how amazing it is when you all get together and you have like-minded people. So again, from my perspective, I appreciate what you do, and I think it's great for the industry. But how do people find out about you? How do you learn more about you?
Yeah, for example, you can find me on docker.com/captains and look for Stefan, and you find the Twitter handle, GitHub link, and the link to my blog post. I think it's difficult to pronounce it here, to type it correctly. Just look at the Docker Captains list and you will find me. And as said, follow me on Twitter. I will post every week, every day, some news about Windows containers. And I think I will write some blog posts in the near future about some nice things I've tried out on Windows as well. The latest thing was, for example, using the traffic proxy, a tiny forward proxy that is known on the Linux world, which runs perfectly in Linux containers. It's also working in Windows containers. And as it has, for example, Let's Encrypt functionality built in, you can put it into a Windows container on Azure and have all your website Let's Encrypted out of the box. It's really cool. I will write that in the next few days, I think.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I was reading your one article. I think it's a really good article, and just top to down on just Windows, Docker on Windows. You do a really good job of just kind of laying out the whole end-to-end. Anyway, like always, I love this part of my job. I love it because I get to talk to really smart people, ask them questions, and learn a whole lot. So I thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for having me here.
All right.
Okay.